So I've exposed what my reading taste was back in third grade, and I've exposed the fact that I love animation. Now I must reveal, yes, I love musical theater. Today we'll be talking about Newsies, or more specifically, the history behind the story of Newsies. The Newsboys' Strike of 1899. This event in history, at the very end of the 19th century, the Newsboys of New York went on strike in order for better compensation from Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. The strike lasted several days and successfully stopped the circulation of the two newspapers, the New York Journal and the New York World. The strike lasted a total of 2 weeks, causing Pulitzer's New York World to decrease its circulation from 360,000 sold per day to 125,000. Although newspaper prices didn't lower, the strike was successful, forcing the New York Journal and the New York World to offer full buybacks to their sellers, which increased the amount of money that the newsboys received for their work. This event in history inspired the Disney movie Newsies in 1992. Then it later would be revived to musical theater and Broadway in 2012. In 1898, with the Spanish-American War increasing newspaper sales, several publishers raised the cost of the Newsboys bundle of 100 newspapers from 50 cents to 60 cents, a price increase that at the time was offset by the increased sales. Though after the war, many newspapers reduced the price of their papers back to how they were prior, the World and the Journal did not. At the time, newsboys were essential to newspaper distribution. Morning editions would often be delivered directly to subscribers, but the afternoon editions, however, would almost entirely rely on the newsboys to sell. The newsboys bought their papers at 50 cents per hundred and sold them for 1 cent each. The Newsboys' Strike of 1889 wasn't the only strike that the Newsies had put on, though it was the last notable strike they held against the World and the Journal. There were newsboys' strikes from 1886 and 1887 as well. On July 18, 1889, the Newsboys of Long Island City turned over a distribution wagon for the New York Journal and declared a strike against the papers of Joseph Pulitzer, publisher of the World, and William Randolph Hearst, publisher of the Journal, until prices rolled back to 50 cents per hundred. The Newsboys of Manhattan and Brooklyn were quick to follow the next day. Now, the Newsboys did get quite violent in the early days of the strike. Any young man or boy found selling the two boycotted papers would be mobbed by groups of strikers, beaten, and have his papers destroyed. When the newspaper owners paid grown men to sell their papers, even with the offer of police protection, the Newsboys would find ways to distract the officers so they could get at the scabs. Women and girls fared a bit better because, as union leader Kid Blink put it, a feller can't soak a lady. The newsboys also distributed flyers and hung signs around the city, encouraging people to help them in their cause by not buying the World or the Journal. When an estimated 5,000 newsboys from Manhattan attended a rally at Irving Hall, along with 2,000 boys from Brooklyn and several hundreds from other areas of the city, the Union president, Dave Simmons, read a list of resolutions stating that the state would stand still until the papers reduced their prices. He also called for the newsboys to adopt nonviolent methods of resistance. Other speeches at the rally were made by Warhorse Brennan, Jack Tietjen, Bob the Indian, Union leader Kid Blink, Crazy Arborn, Annie Kelly, and Brooklyn Union leader Racetrack Higgins. The night ended with a song sung by Hungry Joe Kernan. In the days following the rally, the newsboys' tactics changed to be largely nonviolent, and when they were no longer beating people who sold the World or the Journal, the strike was still effective because the members of the public were on their side and chose not to buy the papers, even if they were on sale. On July 26, the newsboys had planned a parade, and an estimated 6,000 boys would march, accompanied by a band and fireworks, but it didn't end up happening due to the issues with obtaining a permit. When rumors spread about Kid Blink and David Simmons, stating that they had accepted a bribe to sell the boycotted papers, some of the newsboys believed it, leading the two to resign. David Simmons stepped down from Union president to treasurer, and Kid Blink was chased down the street by some newsboys who believed the rumors, whether they were true or not. When a police officer saw this, he assumed that Kid Blink was the leader and arrested him for disorderly conduct. Kid Blink was given a fine and jeered at from outside the court. Even though some of the newsboys tried to replace Kid Blink as the leader, none of them had the same level of power and influence as he did. The newsboys' faith in the centralized leadership diminished. On August 1st, the World and the Journal offered the newsboys a compromise. The price of the newspapers would remain at 60 cents, but they would buy back the unsold papers. The newsboys accepted this compromise and disbanded the union on August 2nd, the following day. Kid Blink, or Louis Belletti, or maybe it's Louis, I don't know how to pronounce that, got a job as a cart driver and later as a saloon keeper after the strike. He may have also worked as the right-hand man to New York mobster Chuck Connors. He died in 1913 at the age of 32 of tuberculosis. David Simmons had started selling papers at the age of 8 and was 21 when the strike happened. He was the president of the Newsboys Union at the beginning of the strike, then the treasurer in the second half of it after getting accused of betraying the strike. Racetrack, or Ed Higgins, was the leader of the Brooklyn Union and was elected vice president of the General Union after Kid Blink and David Simmons were accused of selling out. He was a fixture at the Sheepshead Bay racetrack, and at the time of the strike, he referenced horses in many quotes at the time of the strike. Racetrack was a charismatic speaker. Mention of his humor from his speeches to the striking newsboys were stated in several papers. Horace Cohen became the union leader after Kid Blink had been accused of betraying the union. Very little is known about him, but a memo from the 20th of July from John Pulitzer's business manager, Don Seltz, named Cohen as the boy who started the strike in New York City. After Kid Blink and David Simmons stepped down, Henry Major Butts Butler became the leader of the Upper Manhattan Union. He was arrested on July 31st, 1899, on charge of blackmail after telling executives at the New York World that he would not break the strike for less than $600. $600 in 1900 is roughly equivalent to $21,000 in 2022, and probably a little more now. Annie Kelly was one of the few newswomen loyal to the strike. This made her popular with the union newsboys, who saw her as an almost patron saint. At the rally at Irving Hall, she told them, "All I can say, boys, is to stick together and we'll win. That's all I've got to say to you." Then the newsboys pulled her off stage, cheering for her after her short speech. The Newsboys strike of 1899 inspired later strikes, such as Butte, Montana Newsboys strike of 1914 and the 1920s strike in Louisville, Kentucky. Some decades later, the introduction of urban child welfare practices led to improvements in the newsboys' quality of life. The first reference to the Newsboys strike of 1899 appeared in DC Comics in 1942. The Newsboys Legion first appeared in the issue number 7 of Star Spangled Comics and continued therein through issue 64, as well as in various forms, such as modern-day comics. Then in 1992, Disney released a movie inspired by the events of the Newsboys strike of 1899 titled Newsies. In this version of the story, the main character was named Jack Kelly, though there was a homage to Kid Blink as he was a character in the movie as well. The musical theater adaptation of the movie, and the version more fans like, was debuted on stage in 2011, making it to Broadway in 2012 and going until 2014. Then, from 2014 to 2016, they went on tour and filmed a version of Newsies that was digitally released to Netflix in 2017, filmed in 2016. It was on Netflix until it switched to Disney Plus when that came out. In November 2022, a production of Newsies opened off West End in London for a limited run. Another form of media that the Newsboys strike was referenced in is the 2003 nonfiction book Kids on Strike by Susan Campbell Bartoletti. Hope you enjoyed learning about the Newsies and all that. I just wanted to make a video on this because it was just interesting to me at the time. And now I feel like I have to rewatch Newsies somehow.